Well, good morning. Thank you for being here today as I, along with the representatives from our agency partners, announce the results of Operation Nightingale. It is a broad and coordinated law enforcement operation that, as its name might suggest, took aim at harmful fraud that affects public health in connection to one of the most cherished and trusted professions, and that is nursing. Our healthcare professionals play an important role in our public health system. We therefore expect our healthcare professionals to be who they claim they are. Specifically, when we talk about a nurse's education and credentials, shortcut is not a word we want to use. When we take an injured son or daughter to a hospital emergency room, we don't expect, really cannot imagine, that the licensed practical nurse or registered nurse treating our child took a shortcut around educational and licensing requirements. When we entrust the life of an elderly parent to the staff of an assisted living or skilled nurse facility, the last thing we want to learn is that the nurses administering the medications, the ones charged with carrying out the doctor's order, took shortcuts on their clinical training and used fake nursing diplomas to get their licenses and jobs. Unfortunately, thousands of people have taken these shortcuts. The prosecutor and agents here today have worked tirelessly to disrupt this fraudulent scheme. Today I'm honored to announce that their hard work has paid off. In 3 recently unsealed indictments by a South Florida grand jury and 2 informations filed on my office's behalf by Assistant United States Attorney Christopher Clark, 25 individuals have been charged across multiple states with wire fraud crimes, including conspiracy, for their alleged participation in a scheme that involved the following. 1, that is selling fake nursing diplomas and transcripts to individuals who use those fake credentials to sit for state board examinations, obtain their nursing licenses, and ultimately get jobs at hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and assisted living facilities. Arrests have been made in Florida, New York, New Jersey, and Texas, and search warrant has been executed in Delaware. So far, we have made 21 arrests, and there are 2 more individuals who are surrendering within the next 24 to 48 hours. Before I go on discussing how this fraud scheme generally worked, I would like to introduce representatives from the FBI Miami and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, Miami. The 2 agencies whose phenomenal investigative skill and commitment yielded these results. From the 2 agencies, we have Chad Yarbrough, who is Acting Special Agent in Charge, FBI Miami. We truly appreciate the work that you've done in this. We also have Omar, where are you, Omar? Omar Perez Ibar, Special Agent in Charge, Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, Miami Field Office. Again, we appreciate all the work that you've done in this investigation. You will hear briefly from the special agents in charge shortly. Of course, I want to, introduce Chris Clark, whom I've worked with for many, many years, who was in charge of this investigation from the office. As you can imagine, an investigation of this magnitude required the contribution and collaboration of multiple law enforcement agencies. We therefore receive invaluable assistance from other agencies whose representatives also join us here today. It is my pleasure to also recognize Eric Weindorf, Acting Deputy Special Agent in Charge, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and Gregory Kitsos, Resident Agent in Charge, Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Inspector General, and 2 representatives from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, Miami Region, Juan A. Vargas, Acting Inspector in Charge, and David Arias, Acting Assistant Inspector in Charge. I want to briefly speak with you a little bit about the scheme itself. We obviously will make the charging documents available to you. but the indictments were unsealed last night. Let me give you a brief summary of what you will learn. The defendants who were charged in indictments and informations generally fall into two categories. The first category, basically, the defendants include owners, operators, and employees of 3 formally approved and accredited South Florida nursing schools. The schools are Siena College in Broward County, Florida, Palm Beach Nursing School in Palm Beach County, and Sacred Heart Nursing School in Broward County. According to the charging documents, the defendants in the first category, that is the schools, they prepared and sold fake nursing school diplomas and transcripts to nursing candidates, knowing that the candidates would use those false documents to, 1, sit for nursing board examinations, secure nursing licenses, and 3, ultimately obtain nursing jobs in medical facilities, not only in Florida, but in elsewhere across the country. Obviously, the schools weren't doing this for free, right? On average, these defendants charged about $15,000 for a fake nursing degree diploma and school transcript. And the documents falsely represented that the candidates had completed all the hands-on clinical training and coursework required to become registered nurses or licensed nurse practitioners. The fact of the matter, though, is the nursing candidates had done no work for these diplomas. So think of first the schools, right, as the first category of co-conspirators. Now, you needed a different group of folks to actually bring folks to those schools. The second category of defendants, they include recruiters. Typically, the recruiters were associated with the nursing programs in other states who looked to one of these 3 nursing schools in Florida for the fake diplomas and transcripts. The recruiters described the fake documents to their students as a shortcut to getting those licenses and jobs. Those nursing candidates who agreed, they each paid about $15,000 for a fake diploma and transcripts. And obviously, they were able to avoid hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of clinical training. Think of it this way. In order for you to become a nurse when you go to school, there are a couple of things you got to do, right? You have to take the coursework. Separate from the coursework, you have to do the clinical part, right? Where you spent countless hours actually getting that experience. These people didn't go through that. That part was completely skipped by getting the fake diplomas. In terms of the numbers, this was truly large scale. Over 7,600 fake nursing diplomas were sold by these Florida schools from about 2016 to 2022. At about $15,000 per diploma, we're looking around at $114 million paid for these documents. We estimate that about 30% of those 7,600 diplomas, 7,600 people who purchased these fraudulent diplomas, practiced nursing somewhere in the United States, perhaps currently. Not only is this a public safety issue, but it also tarnishes the reputation of nurses who actually did the hard clinical and coursework required to get licenses and jobs. And of course, it erodes the centuries-old trust we have built with our country's nurses. The 3 Florida nursing schools involved in this scheme have been essentially shut down, and the FBI and HHS OIG agents have alerted nursing boards across the country about this fraud. Right now, I want to turn over to the individuals who have actually been instrumental in this investigation. Those are the individuals without whom we are not standing where we are today. Let me begin first with FBI Miami Acting Special Agent in Charge, Chad Yobro. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Yarber. I'm the acting special agent in charge here for the Miami FBI field office. This morning, arrest operations were initiated against 23 individuals charged with allegedly engaging in a scheme to sell false and fraudulent nursing degree diplomas and transcripts. As of the start of this press conference, 21 of the 23 have been safely taken into custody, with 2 arranging for self-surrender. In addition to the 3 arrests here in the Southern District of Florida, there were arrests made elsewhere in Florida, plus New Jersey, New York, and Texas. These arrests have been made without incident. Efforts are currently underway to locate the 2 individuals who will be self-surrendering. Healthcare fraud is nothing new to South Florida. We, unfortunately, lead the nation in healthcare case-related fraud that bleeds away billions from taxpayer dollars and its intended beneficiaries. The chief motivation for this type of crime is almost always greed, and that is no different in this case today. What is disturbing about the scheme is the possibility of harm coming to patients under the dubious care of one of these allegedly fraudulent nurses. The focus of our investigation has been on the individuals responsible for issuing these purportedly fraudulent documents as seen in the arrest today. However, these allegedly fraudulent documents may have allowed nurses to serve in critical healthcare roles. Thus, we've provided the names to the National Council of State Boards of Nursing and state licensing boards in all 50 states, as the boards govern the approval of nursing licenses with their respective states. The state boards are responsible to take any action against the allegedly fraudulent nurses under their purview. I want to thank all the law enforcement agencies who took part in this investigation with HHS and FBI. That includes Homeland Security Investigations and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. Without their collaboration, this would not have been possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me now introduce you to Omar Perez Ibar, who is the special agent in charge of HHS OIG. Please.
Good afternoon. I am Omar Perez Ibar, the special agent in charge of the Office of Inspector General for Health and Human Services. And today's announcement is the culmination of a deliberately measured investigation, aptly named Operation Nightingale, for it involved nursing schools in Florida selling fraudulent diplomas and transcripts across the country. The deeply concerning allegations at the center of this investigation goes against the very tenets of the nursing profession. The alleged conduct by these individuals and those who received the fake documents is an affront to Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing standards, the namesake of the world's first nursing school, and for whom the Hippocratic Oath was modified and named the Nightingale Pledge. Now, upon completing their training, nurses pledge to, among other things, abstain from whatever is deleterious and mischievous, and do all that is in their power to maintain and elevate the standard of the profession. The individuals charged today facilitated countless individuals to sully that pledge. Naturally, investigating a scheme involving fake nursing diplomas and transcripts is at the heart of our agency's mission to protect the health and well-being of the American public, especially children and the elderly who benefit from HHS programs, including Medicare and Medicaid. It is true that in this case, we identified several types of healthcare facilities where some of the individuals with these fake documents may be providing services. I want to assure you now that to date, we have not learned of nor uncovered any evidence of patient harm stemming from these individuals potentially providing services to patients. Now, that potential harm to patients is precisely why we've been working with the state licensing boards from the onset of this investigation, sharing as much as we can, as fast as we can, so that they can assess what actions to take to prevent these individuals from rendering care. We encourage anyone with any concerns to contact their state's licensing boards or their healthcare provider. Finally, I want to commend the women and men in the law enforcement agencies represented on this stage. While the work on this case is extremely challenging, your passion and dedication to safeguard the public was evident. And on behalf of Ms. Nightingale, I applaud your efforts to protect patients and the integrity of the honorable nursing profession.
Many thanks, Special Agent Ibar. Again, I cannot thank you folks enough for all the work that you've done. This investigation, frankly, given the time span it had taken to actually get to where we are, was done quite efficiently. This is all I have. If folks have any questions, please.
You said that of the 30% that may have actually been practicing and that the nursing boards will deal with them. Any potential criminal liability for those nurses who are using these licensures and degrees and actually practicing medicine? Is there criminal liability for them?
You know, that's a very important question, right? Because when you think about it, these folks, there's always the argument of whether or not folks knew what they were getting into. But in these instances, most of us know that if you're going to be a nurse, there's going to be certain requirements, right? You're going to have to take classes. You're going to do the clinical course. And at the very moment where you actually pay someone $15,000, right, there is very little doubt that you're doing something that is inappropriate, that is fraudulent. For our purpose, though, is the most important thing for us was to make sure, to the extent we're talking about healthcare here, that we stop the bleeding, right? What have you learned when somebody gets a major injury? You stop the bleeding. And the bleeding here is to basically stop those schools from being able to actually put more fraudulent diplomas out, public sphere. As to those individuals, what I can tell you right now, we do not have any current plans as to necessarily indicting or not, but you can imagine that there's a certain responsibility that also falls on state regulatory agencies and bodies to actually deal with that group of people.
What would be the pitch for the recruiters and the schools? Was it as blatant as, hey, let's shortcut this and we'll expedite your degree and your credentials? Or was it as, oh, here's a quicker way to get your degree? Was it as obvious, or was it kind of hidden when the recruiters were trying to sell this $15,000 diploma?
I imagine there are different pitches, but obviously this is one of the situations where if in fact you're looking for a fraudulent diploma, and those recruiters, they work with those schools. So the recruiter is not operating separate from the schools. The school, in one hand, is basically having interaction with the recruiters, and obviously within that industry, within that particular community, the recruiters will know who is trying to be nurses. And think of it this way too. It's not just folks who wanted to become nurses from scratch. You may have, for instance, an LPN who wanted to become a registered nurse. That LPN would have had the credentials, right, to be an LPN. And that LPN decides, okay, I have a day job. That's a 12-hour day job. And right now, that's going to require me to actually spend some more resources of time for me to become a registered nurse. I can just pay for this and get it done. So in terms of the pitch, I don't think it's a hard pitch for those who want to get a fraudulent diploma.
The concern here, obviously, the patients. What's being done to locate the people that are currently working with these fraudulent documents right now, that may be in the healthcare system?
Right. That's an important question. And what the agencies that have actually worked these investigations have done is to, first I want to give you a little bit of background, right? In order for you to become a nurse, right, you have to take a test. And that test is actually administered by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. They ultimately get to know everyone who's actually taking an actual test. They also get the test results, right? So what we do know is the people who actually went to school and, well, didn't go to school, who got those fraudulent diplomas, we know who they are. Those names have been referred to the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. And at that point, though, there is an apparatus that's going to follow up on that. From our perspective on the federal side, whether that be the FBI and HHS, there are limitations to what we can do, right? Certainly, folks, once we uncover the crime, we investigate it, and we bring it to the surface now, there are other parts, there are other chains in the link that have to do their part, right?
If there was a message that you had for those patients out there that may be concerned for their safety, what would you tell them?
Well, what I would tell them is, well, first of all, it is a legitimate concern, right? The notion that to be concerned about the fact that when you go to the hospital, whether that be yourself, your child, your parents, I would imagine most of us here have ailing parents and elderly parents that they have to deal with, that they take to the hospital, to the doctor on a fairly regular basis. And it is quite natural to be concerned about whether or not when that person gets to the hospital, right, the person who was taking care of them, let's face it, the doctors do not spend as much time as the nurses do. So I understand folks would naturally feel really concerned about that. But what we can tell you, though, is from the investigations that we have done, we have not found that any harm has resulted from sort of the diplomas that were issued to those in that fraudulent matter, right? So, I'm not in the business of speaking absolutely and giving certain assurances that I may not have, but from what we have and the information we have now, we have not had any sort of reported harm. But it is of concern when you think about it, when you have nurses who were supposed to know what they're doing, and you find out that they may not be qualified. And by the way, we know that there are times when folks go to the hospital, they go to these places, you find out a nurse is unable to find the right vein or something like that, and you sort of wonder to yourself, how in the world that the nurse cannot find the right vein to draw the blood or some other fairly basic stuff, right? So.
Do any of these schools have any classrooms, textbooks, instructors, and did any of these quote-unquote students actually do any class time, or did they avoid it altogether?
So it's my understanding that those schools were operating as schools at some point, right? But the actual state licensing, entity, you have to have a certain passing rate in order to maintain your accreditation. Those schools were notoriously having very, very low passage rates. So at some point, the state licensing says, guess what? You guys need to stop. You can no longer engage in the business of educating nurses. So what they followed up with is, okay, we're going to continue to actually, so what we're going to do now, to the extent we cannot provide legitimate diplomas, we're going to provide fraudulent diplomas, right? So you had people, for instance, some of these outfits were supposed to have stopped in 2018, right? So someone who needed a diploma in 2020, they would backdate the diploma to the time when the state licensing board would have told them you may no longer continue to provide education, right? So the investigators from HHS and FBI were able to see, well, if this person's getting a diploma in 2020, right, with a check that was issued in 2020, backdated 2018, clearly there was some improprieties there.
Is there a common thread between the three entities since they're so close in location?
Well, the common thread, to be more specific, what would you be looking for?
Two in Broward, one in West Palm. They're all doing the same thing. It doesn't seem that there's any in Miami, but is there a common thread person or somehow they're all connected?
Well, I mean, the obvious thread is this is South Florida, to the extent.
Is there like a person that they're connected with and you somehow started looking at all these very closely?
The thread I would say is a couple of things. One is obviously fraudsters tend to sort of hang out with each other, so these individuals have relationships within each other. the thread, I would say, is between schools and recruiters. The recruiters obviously have relationships with the schools and the school owners. The other thread that maybe is those things happen in certain communities, right? So in that regard, there are certain demographics that these schools tend to basically go after by virtue of the fact of who they are. It's like when you have a Ponzi scheme, right? Those are affinity crimes, right? So if you have if you have a Cuban American who may have committed a Ponzi, you will find that there are people that he knows or she knows. So in this particular case, we have a couple of the schools. They are owned by Haitian Americans. I imagine in that sense, then there are some nurses, within that demographic. There are many nurses within that demographics that would have gotten their nursing degrees from there. But keep in mind though is there's another angle to this though, right? So you have the nurses that were getting their diplomas, their fake diplomas down here, but you also had the recruiters who went out of state, who were recruiting people from out of state who wanted fraudulent diplomas in those places in New Jersey, New York, in Texas, and Delaware. So that would, tell you the thread there. The thread is where fraudsters, there's an opportunity to make money. In this particular case, we're talking about really tens and tens of millions of dollars across the schools. That speaks for itself.
Yeah. I have a question about the statistics. You indicated there are about 7,600 students who received these fake diplomas and paid an average of about $15,000. Of the 7,600, 30% actually passed the exam.
Right.
So 2/3 of those 7,600 possibly sat for the exam and didn't pass it. 1/3 sat for the exam and passed it. And I was just wondering, with the lack of training that you've described in the court documents and today, how did these 30% pass the exam? Were they former nurses, say, in the Haitian American community here in South Florida?
Yeah.
Were they part of, a group of other ethnic groups, say, in Texas,
Right.
How did they pass the exam?
So Jay, I would say to you, as a lawyer, there are times when I ask myself, how did these lawyers pass the bar exam, right? Nonetheless, they did pass the bar exam, right? So listen, there may be a disconnect in terms of a nurse who did not actually sit for the actual, didn't take the courses, didn't go to the clinical course, and that person may be sufficiently smart and be able to actually overcome a test, all right? That can happen. And also keep in mind, too, you have to look at the group. We're not necessarily looking at a group of folks who have never been exposed to nursing. If you have an LPN who's applying to be an RN, well, that LPN would have had certain knowledge about nursing, right? And that LPN, I imagine, would have had sufficient knowledge to be able to sit and actually pass the test. I am guessing that may be one of those circumstances. Having said that, though, right, that says nothing about their obligation, right, to fulfill the requirement. Whether or not you pass the licensing test, that to me, that's besides the point. There's a reason why you have a licensing requirement. There's a reason why you actually have to take those courses. There's a reason why you actually have to go through and actually have the actual clinical part of it, so you actually have experience actually treating people, right? Neither you or I want to be sort of the guinea pig for that nurse who hasn't done that, right? So to me, if you pass the test, right, but you hadn't done those things, that's no redemption in any way whatsoever. But I appreciate and understand your question.
Was there an element of coaching on the part of the school's instructors? I remember in prior complaints, there had been, in indictments involving 3 or 4 others, there had been references to coaching and whatnot.
So,
was that also present here?
So the recruiters, part of their pitch, it's also we're going to help you with the actual test, right? In that sense, there may have been some of that, right? But what you also know, though, Jay, is this. When it comes to test taking, which we deal with in whether that be an SAT, an ACT, or whatever, the LSAT, right, or the bar exams, people can be coached in all kinds of ways to pass exams, and that says nothing about your ability and your qualification to do all sorts of things, right? And I always say that, and I say that jokingly, Jay, but you know, there's a whole bunch of folks who pass the bar exam who have no business being lawyers, right? So in that particular case, one may say, well, you know, there's folks who pass the licensing requirements who have no business being nurses.